All right, well, welcome everyone. This is session number 3 of the Sharing Visions Conference. The session is titled Project ReShare, a community-owned resource sharing system. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Walter Stein. I'm the Executive Director of the Fenway Library Organization, or as we call it, FLOW. FLOW is a consortium of mostly small to mid-sized academic libraries spanning the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And before I introduce our panelists, let me just remind you of our housekeeping items, which if you haven't been with us today, you should be aware of. First off, the session is being recorded, and your participation denotes your consent to being recorded. You're welcome to say hello in chat, to share reactions and resources, and keep the conversation going. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions of the presenters so we can track those easily. This is the only place we will look for presenter questions. As you interact with each other today, please remember that this is a safe space for everyone. Please use the chat and the Q&A features respectfully. Feel free to share about the conference on social media using the hashtag #SharingVisions2020. Presenter resources and session recordings will be made available on the conference site. We will put the web address in the chat. I think that should be coming shortly. And finally, a conference evaluation will be emailed to all attendees the day after the event. I guess that's tomorrow. And we encourage everyone to fill out the questionnaire and look forward to your feedback. So let's get started. Our presenters for this session are Sebastian Hammer, Jill Morris, and Kristen Wilson. Sebastian Hammer is one of the co-founders of Index Data, and he worked as as the original lead of the Folio development project when Index Data was building the core platform and architecture. Sebastian was one of the initial group of people that began Project ReShare. Jill Morris is Executive Director of PALCI, the Pennsylvania Academic Library Consortium. Jill has extensive experience with collaborations between libraries and is chair of the Project ReShare Steering Committee. Say that 5 times fast. Project ReShare Steering Committee. And finally, Kristen Wilson is Index Data's lead project manager and functional expert. Kristen came to Index Data from North Carolina State University, where she played leading roles in Folio and other large-scale library collaborations. In the interest of full disclosure, I'll mention that Flo worked with Index Data over the past several years on the Folio project. Working together, Flo and Index Data migrated Simmons University to Folio. Simmons was the second implementation of Folio in North America. And both Sebastian and Kristen were instrumental in our success on that project. During that time, we also met with Jill and other library directors at ALA Midwinter to discuss the promise of Folio for consortia. So with that, Sebastian, did you want to get us started, or is that the correct order?
Jill is going to kick us off.
Yeah.
Okay, goodbye, Jill.
All right, thanks, Walter. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here today. Thank you so much for having us. As Walter said, I'm Jill Morris. I'm the Executive Director of the PALCI Consortium. Just to give a little bit of background about kind of the perspective that I'm coming from, I am head of a consortium that's made up of 71 academic and research libraries. And one of the things that is really core to what we do as a consortium is resource sharing. It's really where we were started as foundationally and where we think we're going to continue to be and need to be in the future. So we are 71 academic libraries that don't share an ILS and are regionally focused across Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and West Virginia. And it's really critical that we be able to share our materials quickly with each other. And so that's a little bit of background about sort of how we came to this conversation. We do have a tool today that we use that's a consortial borrowing tool. And today I'm going to tell you about Project ReShare, give you some of the context and background, and then quickly hand it off to Kristen Wilson and Sebastian Hammer, who will share the more exciting parts of what we're doing and give you a look at the software itself. All right, so I'm just going to advance our slides here if I can. So the conversation really started around what should the future of resource sharing be? And of course, as we started to think about that, we were feeling the impacts of lots of different changes that were happening in our ecosystem. Certainly, many of you are probably familiar with some of the market consolidation that's happened among library vendors and tools. And that was concerning to us, and for a couple of different reasons, but really because we wanted to be able to begin doing some innovation that we felt our patrons were going to expect. And the market consolidations that were happening, especially in resource sharing, but across the board in library technologies, we felt were going to ultimately limit us in terms of our choices and what we could do in the future. We had concerns related to pricing. And then in addition to that, we were experiencing all sorts of different transformations inside of the libraries. And many of those have just been sped up by COVID-19, and really sort of drove home for us that we needed to be able to change and adjust based on what our patrons were needing. So some of those transformations that are happening more broadly across libraries, I think are also really relevant to resource sharing in particular and the tools that we use. I've got this sort of chart here that shows what I think today's systems look like versus what ReShare is going to represent for us in the resource sharing space. But really focusing in on the need to move from very system centric approaches with monolithic systems and vertical stacks into an environment where we're very user centered and user driven, focusing in on interoperability. I got to hear Nettie's presentation earlier from NISO, and we've been thinking about this the whole way through with this project. We've often thought about how we share our individual collections, and there's been a whole lot of writing about the need to shift from that individual collection mode into a more collective collection environment. And we need systems that will allow us to actually do that fairly seamlessly, and again, with the user in the center. So many of our old systems really focus on print. They are single network based, so looking at a singular consortium, looking at APIs as ways of connecting. And then most of them are proprietary softwares, things that we can't actually make adjustments to without working within the constraints that a vendor might provide. So on the right, again, looking at ReShare, we're hoping to move towards, support for multiple formats, sharing across many different formats of materials. We're thinking not just about singular consortia, but how do we connect multiple consortia together? We need to move into standards-based protocols in order to allow information to flow between systems. We can't collaborate well if we're all expected to use only the same system. And then in addition, we need to have the flexibility to make those changes that we need for our patrons. And I personally believe that open source is the way that we can do that, but we do need to invest in it. So we were really excited at PALCI about getting involved in ReShare for all of those reasons. And a group of libraries and consortia really came together around those ideas. The Big Ten Academic Alliance, they put together a white paper on what they thought the future of resource sharing should be. And many of the consortia that were using resource sharing tools, consortial borrowing tools in particular, came together to start to talk about that. And ultimately what emerged was this shared goal or shared vision for what resource sharing should be. And our original stated goal for ReShare was to develop a consortial resource sharing system that was open source, standards focused, modular and flexible, community owned, and initially focused on returnable items, which was sort of our lowest hanging fruit, and then moving into a longer term goal of really enabling the sharing of collective collections that I've already mentioned. Most importantly, empowering library driven and user centered workflows, giving us the power back to do the things we needed to do in our environment. So a little bit about how the project actually works. We've got a steering committee. I think we've got quite a nice governance structure here that lets people see how they can be engaged. We've got a steering committee that governs the resourcing of the project, and then a series of teams that supports the development, the communications, the engagement of the community, subject matter experts to bring in library staff who can tell us about how the system should really work from their perspective. And you can see the list of some of the member organizations down there at the bottom. So we've got 21 members at this point. I think how does it work really goes back to the people that are involved. It's important to note that everybody that is involved is really coming to the table as an equal partner. And I think Sebastian will touch on this a little bit later, but initial investments were made based on that premise. So we had substantial commercial development developer investments in the development of the software itself. And we were able to do that because those of us sitting around the table made some provisional service agreements that we would purchase the services for that software that was being developed. And it's being developed in an open source way, which means it's free to anybody to use and to take and do what you wish with it. And so in order to make that value proposition apparent for our commercial developer partners, it was important to us to say, we're going to use your services. You'll recoup your investments if you work with us on this. And we shared a vision, and I think that was just really exciting and something very unique in this partnership. That sort of emerged as a really great model to have commercial developers and libraries at the same table working on the same vision. We also had a number of consortial investments from our founding members, our libraries and consortia and other related organizations that joined. And something that we really wanted to see based on this was some competition that was going to emerge based on service rather than sort of locking people into vertical vendor stacks. We really wanted to be able to provide opportunities for flexibility to serve our patrons in the best way that we know how locally. So we developed a certified service providers program, and something that we're doing with that is basically vetting those providers of ReShare services to say, do you meet certain criteria for our community that we know are important to us? So as I said, the software is free for anybody to use, but of course it costs money to run software programs. And so one of the premises that we started from was this can't cost more than what we currently have. And that was our starting point. And eventually, we want to build out ReShare functionality to be able to allow for as much flexibility as institutions need, but also to be able to contain costs. So the big ideas, and I won't spend too much time because Kristen's going to give us a nice demo, but discovery and delivery of returnable items and non-returnable items, that should be independent and flexible based on your needs of your local environment. The patron must always be in the center of the software, so we always put the patron first as we're making decisions. And then interoperability is just so important, and that's what's needed to break down the barriers between libraries and between consortia so that we're not all forced to always be using the same system, but that information can flow back and forth and really allow for true resource sharing. Some of the opportunities and benefits that we see, certainly we were able to leverage the existing Folio platform. I should say really explicitly, ReShare does not require you to be on Folio as an LSP or an ILS, but we leveraged the software that exists in order to build out the ReShare applications. And then in addition, we were able to leverage other technology like Gold Rush Library Content Comparison Tool. We were able to borrow an algorithm that helped us do some of the work inside of the shared index, and Kristen will show you that in a little bit. We've got the flexibility of a cloud-based multi-tenant system and many opportunities, of course, for library and consortia to share and control costs based on the flexibility of that system. You can choose to self-host the system or purchase services from a service provider. Very focused on interoperability and especially the development of ISO 18626 standards, which some of you may be familiar with, is something that ReShare has focused on quite heavily. And ultimately, we really see this as an opportunity to improve the whole marketplace, because what we're doing is we're forcing competition to also consider some of the changes that we're making, and we think that's pretty exciting. So ReShare 1.0 came out at the end of the summer, and we've got additional future releases planned on a quarterly schedule. Kristen will cover some of that. Here at PALCI in my consortium, we're planning to implement this in the spring, or we've already begun the process of implementation, and we're going to be starting to use it in the spring. And we're just really thrilled to be able to be one of the first users of this new system, particularly because we see some of the benefits that are going to come right away with this software. It's already built out. We're getting some additional features and functionality, especially in the context of the shared index that ReShare will provide to us. So we're really excited to see some of those green check marks that that are demonstrated on the left-hand column under what's already available within ReShare. Some of the use cases that we had right off the bat was that we were going to support academic consortia, but we also realized that we wanted to support multi-type consortia as well. And we've got a number of folks on the steering committee that represent those interests. In the early days, we wanted to focus on returnables, and soon we'll focus on other formats, and I'll let Kristen and Seb talk about that. We've got an out-of-the-box discovery interface, and that's exciting, but we also knew we wanted to be able to support additional integrations, and we're going to be able to do that soon. And we've got some working prototypes already kind of going. And then in addition, we wanted to be able to, really think about resource sharing more broadly than we've ever thought about it before, in the context of this isn't just a transactional process, but it's actually part of a bigger ecosystem of collections more generally. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen to go ahead and give us a demo of what exists with ReShare today.
Thanks, Jill. Just get my screen up. All right, so as Jill said, I'm going to be doing a demo of a ReShare environment and the different components that make up this environment, so that you can see how some of the vision that Jill talked about has been brought to life over the past year or so. And I'm going to begin the demo here in the shared inventory module. And so, as Jill mentioned, a big component of ReShare is not just the resource sharing infrastructure, but the creation of this shared inventory that lets all the libraries in the consortium bring their data together into a central place, and that can be used to support discovery and resource sharing. And we hope that there's other possibilities for this down the road as well. So another thing to mention is that another thing to mention is that the shared index is built on an inventory module that we borrowed from Folio, as well as the Folio platform itself. So those who are familiar with Folio will notice that the look and feel is very similar, and that some of the functionality behaves in a very similar way. So I'll start off here by doing a search, and I'm going to search for Buddhism Tibet. And this is going to bring up a set of search results. And at the present time, we have metadata from 5 different PALCI libraries in this shared index. And those have been piloters with us, and will very soon be working on getting in data from a lot more libraries. The next 6 months will see us really bringing in more and more PALCI libraries at a pretty fast pace. And so if I select one of these records, I think this is the one I'm looking for. I'll point out a couple of things here. So the first thing you'll notice is that on this particular title, we have 3 different holdings records. And so we have a holding from Rowan University, the New School, and Temple University, and that's 3 of our 5 piloters. And so basically what we're doing to create this record is we're setting up harvest processes with each of these libraries to be able to harvest and import their bibliographic and holdings metadata. And for the schools that are using ALMA, we've been able to do this using OAI PMH, which is really nice. And we're also supporting FTP as a way for libraries to get their files to us. As those files come in, we have developed a match process that looks at the different records and tries to identify when a given record matches something that's already in the system. And so in this case, all three of these libraries contributed records that we were able to match and then roll those up into a single record within the shared index. And Jill mentioned our affiliation with the Gold Rush project. And we did borrow an algorithm from Gold Rush to do the matching. And if I scroll down here, you can see that this record and all of the records have kind of this long string of text and spaces. And this is a match key that Gold Rush developed that basically pulls different pieces of metadata from different fields in the bib record and creates this long string. And any records that match essentially have created that exact same string. So we can see here why these records came together, and that can be useful for troubleshooting, and it just exposes a little bit of that process in general. What we're looking at now is really kind of the back end of the shared index. It's a staff view where staff can search and maybe do some troubleshooting on records. And there's a little bit of management as well of lendability status for the resource sharing service. But this is really intended to be a staff tool. And so the next thing that I'm going to show is ViewFind, which basically takes the shared index and creates a patron-facing discovery tool using that data. So I'm going to go ahead and do that same search here. And so we can see a set of search results, and these are probably ranked a little differently than the shared index, but it is the same data, just formatted for a patron experience. And so what we're doing with PALCI, and we'll probably do with other ReShare implementers as well, is we're making this into kind of a branded out-of-the-box consortial search. So any PALCI libraries who want to direct their users to this search screen can do that. And we'll be working on some single sign-on integrations very soon as well that will then allow users to select their institution and log in and be able to place requests. But it'll essentially be a central consortial catalog. And I'll just scroll down and click on a record. And so you can see a full record view as well. And I should really give a shout out to ViewFind. We really benefited greatly from being able to use their open source software as well. There's just a lot of great features that are baked into ViewFind. And so we found we didn't have to do a ton of extra development on top of what we started from. And so this was a really easy process. And I think along with the Folio integration, just a great example of kind of the open source ecosystem that's being built around ReShare, and the way that we're kind of validating the approach that these different projects can exist and be their own projects, but also come together and have some intersections. And so before I move into the request part of the demo, I'm also just going to quickly show this one slide. And this is a screenshot that we got from Millersville University, who are one of our pilot libraries. And they are working on a pilot to integrate the shared index metadata into EBSCO's EDS service. And they're basically doing that using the OAI PMH endpoint that is part of ViewFind. And so they've been able to harvest all the records from the shared index and share those with EBSCO, who then have gotten them into EDS. And so they probably will not really rely on the ViewFind discovery tool. They'll use EDS as kind of a central discovery tool for their users. And you can see there's this link here at the bottom, request at Easy Borrow. And so when their users click on that, then they'll sort of get routed back into a ReShare process and be able to place those requests. But for the libraries who have this option available, it's really nice that they can have a single catalog that has both local and consortial resources.
Kristen, just to let you know, there's a couple questions in the
Oh,
Q&A.
sure.
I don't know if you want to take them now or wait until you're done.
Yeah, that might be good, because then I'm going to be kind of going off onto another topic, so we can talk about discovery things first.
Okay, so the first question is, how often are libraries expected to update their holdings in the shared index?
We're still working on developing a schedule, and I think that's a conversation we'll need to have with PALCI. For the libraries that are using OAI PMH, it's really nice because they don't actually have to do anything. They can just say, we want to update our holdings weekly or monthly, and then we can go ahead and harvest them whenever we need to. For the libraries who are actually delivering files to us, we'll have to work out a schedule, and that might be a little bit more complicated. But and Jill might have some thoughts about what PALCI is thinking in terms of frequency.
Yeah, I think we're still working on that. One thing that we decided fairly early on was that a snapshot in time was going to be 94 to 95% good enough. So if we're not updating every day, I think our group felt like that was okay, because we're not actually doing the real-time availability inside of this search, but it comes later behind the scenes. So that it happens at a different stage in the process, which Kristen will show. So we're still working on that.
So also regarding the central index, someone says or asks, could that conceivably replace WorldCat for user discovery and requesting? That's pretty ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the consortial level, it really can. I mean, it's sort of creating this consortial worldview. Maybe down the road, there's some potential to even combine consortial indexes into even broader indexes. I think we've sort of built the system with that possibility in mind. It's more a question of when is the right time and what are the right circumstances to experiment with that.
Thank you. And the final one at the moment has to do with the discovery front end. An attendee is asking, would the workflow allow for real-time availability to display or be incorporated into the requesting process?
Yes, at the end of the demo, I'll talk a little bit about our roadmap, but that is an area that's on our roadmap, is to look at real-time availability for discovery, both for information purposes. So if I was looking at this record, I could actually see if it was on the shelf right now at Temple, and also for workflow things like blocking requests of items that are already available at the patron's local library and that type of thing. So I think that type of service will support a number of features within ReShare.
I got one more for you. Kristen just came in.
Okay.
Attendee asks, can you clarify, is this for returnables or non-returnables or both?
Oh yeah, good question. We should have set that context. But yeah, right now we're focusing on returnables. So the items that are in the shared index are predominantly print materials, although libraries can contribute electronic records, they just wouldn't be lendable. And so our roadmap and then some of the stuff that Sebastian will talk about definitely includes plans to go beyond returnable. So that is a goal of the project, but right now the functionality is really scoped to returnables. And I should also add, scoped towards lending within a consortium or a group of libraries that has a reciprocal borrowing agreement. So it's not kind of ILL where it just goes out to the world, but it's going out to a defined group with an assumption that everybody will lend if they can.
All right, I think that's it for the moment, Kristen, if you want to continue on.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to place a request and kind of walk through the process of that so that you can see a little bit more of the system. And so right now I am using ViewFind as if I'm a patron from Millersville University. And so when I click the request button, it's going to bring me to a confirmation screen, and I can choose a pickup location. And this is Millersville. They just have one main desk. And this other information I can populate if I need to, but that's optional. So I'll just go ahead and confirm the request. And so now I'm going to move into the ReShare system itself. And you can see this looks pretty similar to the shared index that we were looking at. It's another folio-based system. And one of the hallmarks of Folio is really this app-based approach. So you can see along the top here, we have a series of different apps that support the resource sharing process. And I'm going to be mostly focusing today on the request and supply apps, which are the apps that are going to let us process this request. And so I'm currently looking at the request app, and this is where the library can see all of the requests that have been placed on behalf of its own patrons. And I just need to refresh the screen. And so I can see up here at the top of the list, this is the title that we were just looking at, the Buddhism of Tibet. And this, we've got a new request that has just come in. So when I open this up, from the requester point of view at this point, there's not very much for me to do, but some of the things that I can see that have happened. First, this has been assigned to a supplier, and that's Temple University. They were the only library that held the items, so they were the supplier. But if there were multiple libraries that could have supplied it, we do have load balancing algorithms in place that basically let you define a lend to borrow ratio and then attempt to keep things as close to that ratio as they can, knowing that it's never going to be exactly ideal, but it gives kind of a guideline. The other thing I'll show, and this is just a detailed view of all the metadata associated with this request, is the requesting user. And so I was logged in as a user with this user ID, and this is just a test patron from Millersville. So this isn't anybody's real name or information. But basically, when I placed the request, the system was able to do an NSIP lookup against Millersville's ALMA system and validate that this patron exists. And we have some new functionality that's not in this demo system to verify the patron is in good standing, not blocked, somebody who's able to borrow. And so that's an example of one of the NSIP integrations that we have in place. So right now I'm looking at this request as if I'm Millersville. And so I'm going to switch to another tab in my browser. And I'm now looking at this request from the supplier perspective. And that's Temple. So I'm also in a different ReShare system, which is Temple's system. And I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page as well. And so I can see at the top of my list here, I've got that same request that I was just looking at from the supplier point of view. And if I open this up, I have some different options to get me started on my workflow as a supplier. A couple of things that I'll mention here. One of the things that we've done as this request is placed is that as soon as the request is assigned to Temple, we do a real-time availability check using V39.50, basically to make sure that Temple has an available copy on the shelf right as the request is assigned to them. And because they did in this case, we were able to immediately send a message back to the requester that Temple expects to be able to supply this item. If we had found that there were no available items, then the request would immediately move on to the next supplier. So the goal is to kind of get the request to somebody who has it available as quickly as possible. So at this point in the process, from Temple's point of view, this is a brand new request that's come in. And so the first thing that they would need to do is print a pull slip for this request so that they can go get it from the shelf. And I'll just click this button. This is just showing me a single pull slip. We do have bulk pull slip printing as well, and that probably will be the more common practice. But since we're just looking at one example, it's a pretty standard pull slip. It can be used as a book band as well, or just placed inside the book. And it's got all the information that we need to pull this item, including if you look down at the bottom, it's got a call number and a location, and that was returned from the Z3950 service. So we know that this is a location and a call number of an available item. And so once I had opened up that pull slip for the first time, that marks the slip as printed. And so we're now in a searching stage. And this would be when somebody from the library would go and get the item from the stacks and bring it back to begin processing. And since I don't actually have this item with me, I can actually click here on View Record, And this is going to bring me right into the shared index and the record for this item. And so that's useful for staff purposes. It's useful for me because I can just grab the item barcode here and copy that. And the next thing that I need to do is to basically scan this item barcode so that I can fill the request. And so I'll go ahead and do that. And you'll notice that this is grayed out, and this is just going to take a few seconds to process. And that's because we're doing another NSIP interaction here. So we're doing an NSIP checkout item action. And basically what this will do is, in addition to storing information about the item here on the request, it'll perform a checkout of this item in the local ILS so that staff don't have to log into 2 different systems and be checking things in and out in different places. So we've tried to use those workflow efficiencies wherever we can. And so that's completed. And the last thing that I'm going to do is to mark the request as shipped. And we do have a feature here. I'm just going to, before I do that, click on add note. And I'll add a note and say something like, the cover is torn. And then I would probably normally be holding the pull slip. So I would scan this barcode in, and then I'll submit that. And so certain interactions here, and shipping is a good example, will actually send a message between the requester and the supplier. And that's all done using the ISO 1866 protocol. And if we were working with another vendor that also was using that protocol, we could actually potentially send those same messages outside of the ReShare environment. Which we haven't done that yet, but it's nice to know that we have those options for interoperability there. So I'm back here on the requester side, and I'm just going to update this screen. And so I can see here that the request has been shipped. And I can also see here up in the upper right-hand corner that I've got this little chat icon, and I've got a 1 next to it, which shows me that I have 1 new message. And when I open that up, I can see that note that the supplier sent me about the cover being torn. And I can actually send a reply as well. And so we have the ability to have this messaging back and forth based on the ISO protocol, and to show that messaging in context with the request, which is a really nice feature that I think not a lot of systems have really taken advantage of yet. At this point, we could continue processing this request all the way till the end, and there's a lot more steps in the process. I want to make sure we have enough time for Sebastian and for question and answers, so I'm not going to do the complete request process. But if there end up being questions about any of the any additional features or things in ReShare that people want to know about, I'm happy to come back to all of that.
Kristen, we have a couple quick questions here that
Okay.
relate to the demo where you're at. One has to do with whether or not the pull slip is customizable per library.
At this time, it's not. We did talk a lot with our subject matter experts group about the pull slips, and there's definitely a desire to be able to customize certain aspects of it. And so that's something that's in our backlog and that we would hopefully get to at some point.
Thank you. And then another question just came in. How do renewals work and also recalls?
Yeah, those are 2 other areas that we haven't implemented yet. We've actually heard from our early implementers that that's a little bit less of a priority, but it's something we definitely want to look into. The ISO protocol has some guidance on how to handle those that we would definitely look at following. I think the big unknown has to do with interactions with the local ILS and NSIP support for renewals and recalls. And so that's an area we haven't really delved into yet, but it's definitely on our radar.
All right, I think that's it for the moment with the Q&A. Kristen, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Walter. And before I turn it over to Seb, I'm also just going to quickly talk a little bit about roadmap. This is kind of our internal roadmap and very much a living document, but we are pretty transparent about it as well. And just to give a sense of where we are, we had our ReShare 1.0 release toward the end of the summer. And we're currently working on a 1.1 release that we hope to have out at the end of this month. And then we're aiming to have 2 more releases of 1.2 and a 1.3 sort of time to correspond with PALCI's go live this summer. And I don't have time to get through all the details here, but our next release will be very much focused on resource sharing functionality, core features, and a lot of integration. So we're looking at more integrations with different ILSs. We're also talking with Atlas systems about integrations with Iliad, and we're really excited about that and to be working with Atlas. And then the last release that we're starting to look at is pretty empty. I'm sure we'll find plenty of things to fill it with, but we do know we need to focus a lot on patron management, and that's another area we haven't gotten too deep into yet, but we know is a priority for users. And then we also have a CDL roadmap, and I'm not going to talk too much about that because Sebastian's going to be covering some of that in his slides.
Kristen, are you up for 2 quick more questions?
Sure.
I don't want to cut Sebastian off completely. One attendee asked, does the chat, I think they mean the messaging between the libraries, get saved with the transaction history of the request?
It does.
It does. Okay, that's what I thought. And can you talk, maybe somebody else will talk about this, what type of Iliad add-on you are pursuing?
Sure, I can say a little bit about that. So right now we've talked with Atlas about both a client side and a server side Iliad add-on. I think that the server side is where we're focusing most of our energy so far, just because that's going to be, I think, a little bit more challenging. But we do hope to have both of those in place, and that to at least to begin, we would model them somewhat after the add-ons that Iliad already has with services like Relay or Rapid. And then we're also talking a little bit with Iliad, and this is something that we'll probably spend more time on soon, about the ability for requests to start in ReShare, but if they can't be filled within the consortium, to be able to send them out to an external service like Iliad. Or we have some partners in the UK, and they're looking at something similar with the British Library that plays kind of a role like that. So both having the ability to start a request in Iliad and have it come to ReShare, or to start in ReShare and have it go into Iliad. I think both of those are use cases we have to support.
Thanks, Kristen. There's one more question. I don't know if we should just cut to Sebastian, but I'll just say what it is for you to decide. How do patrons authenticate into the system to make a request?
Yeah, I can do a quick answer. I mean, since we've had a lot of questions already, we might not need as big of a block of time at the end. We're working on integrations with single sign-on. So basically, we do a single sign-on with our ViewFind environment so that the patron could log in using their normal library credentials. And then we would hope that libraries can release some kind of attribute to us as part of that single sign-on process that would allow us to do the NSIP lookup. So essentially, we need kind of a match point between the campus system and the ILS. And then once the login is complete, we actually create a patron account for that patron on the fly within ReShare. In the future, we know that we need to support patron loads for libraries that might not be able to do that type of deep integration. And so that's something that's on our roadmap, is to have a little bit more support for different types of authentication.
All right, thank you. I think that's it for Q&A at the moment.
All right, I will take over. Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, everybody, for some really great questions and for letting us come here and share our project with you. It's been really exciting so far. So I wanted to first just take a couple minutes to talk a little bit about the role of commercial vendors in Project ReShare, and kind of some of the balance of the role of open source software and a commercial collaboration and all that good stuff, because these are questions that often come up. Very briefly, I was one of the co-founders of Index Data. It is getting close to 26 years old at this point. And I came to libraries as a software developer and have kind of worked in software development in libraries for my whole working life. And just because it's awesome and nice. And one thing that struck me over the years of doing this is that we've created a bunch of software and index data, and some of it has been really successful and has lived on for many, many years and been used by lots of people, both commercially and in libraries. And then some of it has not been so good, has been kind of irrelevant or derivative or just obsolete before we even finished making it. And over this fairly long career of building software and libraries, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to make software that is more relevant to the moments that it exists in. And what I've really come to think and feel is that the key is really about the conversation that takes place around the software that you build and the reason for you building that software. And one of the things that's made open source software so compelling for me over the years is that when I work together with other people around open source software, I can have a deeper conversation than I can have if I'm just building and selling a product and other people are buying that product from me by issuing RFPs and we negotiate through contracts and so on. What I've really been looking for in my working life, I think, is that conversation, is sitting together around the table and talking about where things are headed from a strategy perspective, what are the challenges that are facing libraries and consortia, and how can we address that with the software that we're building together. And for me, Project ReShare and Folio before that are sort of the pinnacle or the best exemplars of that conversation of people coming together and essentially investing together in technology to face the challenges that we all see. So that's what we want to do. Those types of collaborations, I feel, are a key way to build software that's more relevant. And we want to be a partner in those communities. We want to be a citizen in those communities alongside libraries and consortia and others. Jill talked about the notion of sort of certified service providers as being part of the model of Project ReShare. And that really was an attempt by us in the community to capture the notion that there's a responsibility for you as a member in the community. Anyone can come and take the software and do stuff with it, but to really be part of the ReShare community, you show up, you participate in the conversation, you contribute back to the community, and that's what we want to do. Another key aspect to this has been, how do we structure that conversation within the project? You know, we've got these organizations together, we've got these different people together. How do we make sure that everybody feels that they have ownership of the technology that's created? You know, the roles are different in the project. Some of us build code, some of us are going to be using that code. We want to make sure that everybody feels that they have a sense of ownership. And one of the ways we accomplished that in ReShare was to put the staff user and the patron in the center of the project, and really build and design the code based on their observations and their needs. And we found that a really powerful tool to drive that was basically to start with the user experience and have the user experience drive how we approach developing the code. So we spent a lot of time building prototypes and wireframes and mockups, and actually taking those mockups into real libraries and real ILL departments. And these pictures actually come from an ILL department in New York, where we brought our prototypes in, we put a camera up, and we asked people to kind of walk through interactions with the system before we had even started building that functionality. And that taught us a lot about what the friction points are, how we could make processes more efficient. And it's informed this design of the software. Kristen referred to this notion of an app-based paradigm, and that was something that we borrowed again from the Folio project. The notion of taking complex functionality and breaking it into apps lets us manage complexity in a very neat way, in that each app doesn't have to be very complex. So we've got a set of apps here that focus on shipment and logistics. There's a set of apps that focus on kind of consortial management, directories, and the shared index. There are apps that we could develop over time that would help student workers kind of see a subset of the functionality that they need to see at any given time to do their work, and then more complex staff functions. Having the functionality of the project split up into these apps gives us a lot of power to, again, capture complex functionality in a simple way, but it also makes it really interesting and really easy in a way to develop the software to meet changing needs. It's a lot easier to add a new app to support a new kind of integration or a new bit of functionality and have that app kind of depend on and use the infrastructure that we built than it is to take an entire monolithic piece of software and try to add some new functionality to it. So that's been a key element of the overall paradigm. To have these apps, because the choice of apps could differ. Different libraries can run different apps depending on what they need to do, depending on whether their focus is on e-resources or print resources, returnables, non-returnables, depending on whether they have a high volume or low volume and so on. So that's been really central to the success. And I want to touch on CDL with my last bit of time here, because I think it is super important. And it's an area that we've dug into specifically because of the challenges of coronavirus. You'll see that there's a set of apps here that focus on shipping and logistics and making it easier to move around and manage the transport of materials between libraries. A lot of the design work and implementation work on those apps were basically curtailed because of COVID. And the project as a whole started saying, you know, we have some concrete challenges here, and that we can't really go out and do deep studies of logistics and test the functionality we're building because people just aren't doing shipping right now because libraries have been shut down. And at the same time, we saw a huge interest in the member libraries across the consortia that are participating in digital solutions, digital ways to expose the collection, and new ways of enabling access to the collections and libraries. So we dug into to CDL from very much a perspective that was influenced by the consortial, the participants in ReShare, which is made up of individual libraries, but also of a lot of consortia. So we set up a working group under the steering committee, which basically took the white paper that describes controlled digital lending, sets up the legal arguments and the models that you can have for managing risks and your relationships with publishers, and we interpreted those sort of that abstract definition of controlled digital lending from a perspective of the individual library. What would it look like to take controlled digital lending and make it just another facet of how a library provides access to its resources? And we knew that to do that right, controlled digital lending basically means that you can lend materials digitally if you own them physically, provided that you don't lend out more copies in total than you own physically. That's the basic paradigm. And to manage that well and dynamically as your conditions or situations might change even during a semester, we felt that it was necessary to have a CDL system be aware of the physical holdings and the contents of the catalog and be able to interact with the catalog. And we started thinking here that ReShare would have an advantage because we've already built the connectors to talk to the ILS, because those are things you need to do for resource sharing as well. So I'm not going to dive into details too much of this, but basically we had a working group come together and define essentially a workflow for CDL, starting with a user placing a request all the way through applying policies to determine whether that material should be lendable, whether you own it physically, whether you have it scanned already or whether you need to go scan it before you can share it. And then using C39.50 to determine availability, using NZIP to actually check the material out or to hide the physical, take the physical material out of circulation, lending it to the user with copy protection and DRM applied so that you can time limit the loan, all the way until the material comes back and the loan ends digitally. And what came out of that is kind of a high-level architecture that we've defined where we've got a set of integrations at the bottom with the library management system for things like patron identification, real-time availability checking things in and out. Then we have functions in the middle for doing things like managing your approval of a CDL request from a patron, either in an automated way or with manual intervention, printing PIC slips, supporting scanning workflows, communicating with the patron. And finally, as a really important piece, as Kristen said, everything in ReShare is fundamentally based on the ISO 18626 standard. 2 different libraries in ReShare are basically 2 entities that communicate with each other through ISO 18626. And we've been working as an active partner in the ISO 18626 maintenance agency or community on extending the standard to incorporate digital lending between libraries. So we can represent a request for a digital loan, we can represent a URL for a digital delivery in addition to managing physical exchanges of materials using ISO 18626. And that whole aspect, that is really what kind of brings controlled digital lending into a consortial sphere where rather than attacking CDL library by library, we are essentially looking for consortial models where you can share the workload of scanning and digitizing, managing processes across libraries, and we can share the collections between libraries. So if one library needs to provide a digital lend to a patron, but they don't have the physical material in hand, they can actually go and execute a digital loan from a library that has the material in hand. And that way we can share the whole collection across the consortium digitally as well. So there's still much to be done here, as well as researching and implementing DRM technologies to make sure that materials are delivered safely and with respect for the publishers and so on. But we have the outlines of a project. We have a plan for getting to basically the beginnings of a product, an open source piece of software that libraries can use in conjunction with the ILS to provide CDL services. So that just brings us to the end of our presentation, and really an invitation for you to come visit the project websites, consider joining or supporting the projects. There is room for people to participate in the conversation. There's room to engage with us on the development fronts. We have a kind of multi-organizational development team that includes people from Index Data and another software company, as well as from Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. And there's definitely room for more. It is a really exciting project to be a part of. And then it's just for me to end by saying thank you, and happy to take any further questions if there are some.
Thank you, Sebastian. I think we have time, maybe a minute or 2 left if there are any additional questions. There's nothing currently in the Q&A. If anyone would like to ask a final question, we could take that before we finish up this session.
Hi, this is Paul Kissman. I'm asking you verbally because as a host, I can't put anything in the Q&A box. How did the back and forth between the Internet Archive and publishers and authors affect your thinking about the CDL project?
I think there's no doubt that the lawsuits against the Internet Archive, and for background, there's a group of publishers that have sued basically the Internet Archive based on their emergency library, their emergency kind of initiative to make their collection digitally available without restrictions during COVID. I think it has made everybody think twice, and we see a variety of different responses to it from individual libraries. There is a clear distinction between state libraries that are more protected against legal action and privately held libraries, but even within privately held libraries, you see variations in how far people can go. It's important to realize that the lawsuit against the Internet Archive was reacting to a specific action that the Internet Archive had taken, which really was not CDL in any meaningful sense, because there weren't any restrictions as to how many people could borrow the material. It wasn't limited by the number of physical copies held by anyone. On the other hand, the wording of the lawsuit is such that it potentially, if the outcome is not good, can affect everybody, because CDL is, as a concept, is specifically mentioned. The challenge is, though, that the lawsuit could very well run for years. As we understand it from the Internet Archive, it will be at least a year before they even start sitting in a courtroom and talking about this. So what do you do in the meantime? And the consensus amongst a lot of libraries seem to be that we need to do something, because COVID is likely to stay with us over the next many months, if not years, right, in various forms.
Thank you.
I'll just add really quickly that, I think it was sort of a wake-up call that we do need to approach this problem that, we can't access the collections we've invested in at this point. Many of our libraries have been closed, or their stacks are closed, and patrons can't get access to those materials. And we needed to find technologies that would allow us to protect publisher rights at the same time that we protect those investments and the purpose for those investments that we've made as a community. And so I would just echo some of the things I heard earlier today around building community-based, standards-based approaches to CDL that do just that put those protections in place, put us in a good position to serve our patrons and to continue to use the materials we've all invested in. And I think community-based solutions is the way to go here. We hope that ReShare is a place where we can sort of spawn some of those conversations and build out tools that you can use independently of whether or not you're using a full-blown ReShare system or not. I think there are a lot of things we can do together that at this point, libraries are doing individually, and we'd really love to bring those conversations together in some way that we're not all reinventing the wheel.
Jill, we should give a shout out to the CDL implementers group. Maybe somebody can drop a link into the chat, but Project ReShare and Stanford together took the initiative to set up a mailing list where basically we're encouraging people to share experiences and concerns and practical experiences that they gain working with CDL in different libraries. And again, the goal is to try to establish common models and a common understanding. And the foundation really is that the entire CDL, the whole premise of CDL is respect for the rights of the publishers. How you balance that with the rights of the libraries that have purchased, legitimately purchased copies of these materials, and their ability to share those materials with their patrons.
Thanks, Sebastian. Thanks, Jill. We're just a minute or two over our time, so I think we need to finish up now. Thank you for all three of our presenters, Jill, Kristen, and Sebastian. So this brings us to the end of the Project ReShare session today. The next session in the conference will be starting at 1:45, and that's called Expanding Patron Identity, Issues, Options, and Opportunities. So we'll look forward to seeing you back again in about 15 minutes. Thank you, everyone.